Hey everyone, Zach from thebarbellphysio.com, and today we're going to talk about fixing the squat butt wink, which is one of the most common faults we'll see in the individual squat performance. So first, let's talk about defining the squat butt wink. So if we watch somebody squat from the side, what we want to see is that as they descend down into the squat, they maintain a neutral spine positioning. What we see with the squat butt wink is as they drop down, their low back flexes and their pelvis tucks underneath them, and they end up in that rounded low back positioning, which we don't want to see when we add a lot of load to the squat. So how do we go about fixing that? Number one is to make sure we're actually dealing with a squat butt wink, because I very frequently see individuals that think that they have a squat butt wink, or they've been diagnosed as that from their coach or a medical provider they're working with, and instead of it actually being a squat butt wink, it's them starting over extended, and as they squat down, they move to a neutral position. So the squat butt wink is starting neutral, moving to flexed. If they're in that situation where they start overextended and then move to neutral, that is not a squat butt wink. Instead, that's an individual that we need to teach how to start with a neutral spine positioning and keep that throughout the movement. If we are dealing with a true squat butt wink, what do we do? Step one for me is always going to be playing with that individual squat setup. So that can mean going from toes forward to toes out, or toes out to toes forward. We can adjust their stance width, or we can adjust what they think of moving first when they squat down. For instance, I see a lot of individuals that start with too hingy of a squat. They've been told to push their hips back when they initiate the squat, and they end up going all hips and not getting enough knee forward. So sometimes we'll cue to push the knees forward more as that individual descends down into the squat. But typically when I see that squat butt wink, I'm going to spend a couple minutes just trying different things in their setup to see if we make a change in those positioning first. After that, if we don't make any changes, then I start looking into mobility. So first test I'm going to do to look at somebody's mobility is we're going to test their ankles out. So I'm going to get an individual down in the bottom of a lunge with their big toe about one hand width away from a box or a wall, and I want to see if they can keep their heel flat on the ground and touch their knee to the wall. If they can, I know they have plenty of ankle mobility for the squat. If they can't, then that might be something that we have to address. If an individual can't drive their knees forward as they squat down, they end up using a lot more hip mobility because they can't get to that position. And so a lot of times, if they then run out of hip mobility, that results in them rounding their low back. So step two in that is addressing any ankle mobility limitations that they have. If you need some ideas for ankle mobility exercises, you can click the link below in the YouTube description for some great exercise ideas, or head to thebarbellphysio.com and search for the best ankle mobility exercises. From there, if their ankle mobility isn't an issue, then we look at hip mobility. And so what I'm typically going to do is apply a stretch or mobilization to that individual's hip joints, have them squat again, and we'll follow that test-retest model and see if we find a hip stretch that helps improve their positioning. Again, for that, there are plenty of articles on thebarbellphysio.com, which I'll link to in the YouTube description below to check out to help you out there. Finally, I'm going to look at improving an individual's stiffness in the squat. Whether this is somebody that did have some mobility limitations or did not, because quite frequently we'll see individuals with a squat butt wink that don't have any mobility limitations, but they don't know how to maintain a rigid, stiff body as they get down to the bottom position of the squat. So I'm going to show my two favorite exercises for developing stiffness in the bottom of the squat. Number one is going to be sit squats. So this ball is going to be lower than what a lot of individuals can do, but I'll find a box, a ball, a chair that is right below where that individual starts to lose positioning, and then I'll get them set up on that surface where they're sitting down on it, set up exactly how they'd be if they were in the bottom of a squat, and we're going to get them to a neutral spine positioning, and then I'm going to tell them, imagine you're sitting on a scale. I want you to make the scale say 50% of your weight. So they'll press down into the ground, they'll unload a little bit, but they're still going to be on that box, ball, whatever they're sitting on. Now let's lift up 1 inch and only 1 inch. And they're trying to lift straight vertical, and then we go back down to 50%, and then back up 1 inch, and then 50%. And we're making sure that we're going straight up and down, and we're keeping everything nice and stiff. We're not letting our back positioning change there, and we're also not rocking forward and back. It's just that straight up and down. That is a fantastic exercise for owning that bottom position of the squat, showing that individual how you want them to be positioned, and then they will learn how to squat with more stiffness. I love that drill, and I would highly recommend you try playing with that. It is much harder than it looks if done correctly. The other drill that I'll typically do to work on an individual creating stiffness in their squat is some goblet squat eccentric isometrics. So I have that athlete squat down really, really slow. And as soon as they start to lose positioning, I'll pause them and I'll give them a cue to work on improving their positioning, and then we'll squat again. And they lose positioning again, we cue again, and we continue that process until we get them squatting down to the depth that we want them to, holding good positioning. When they get to that bottom position, we hold that. We do an isometric contraction there. So typically I'm doing about a 5-second lower down, maybe a pause or two if needed during that descent. Then we hold that bottom position for 3 or 4 seconds. Then we come up fast. And using those eccentric isometrics is another fantastic way to work on dialing in the motor control of the squat to address the squat butt wink fault. Hope this gives you some great ideas to fix your own squat butt wink or that of the athletes that you work with.